Winter held the town of Willow's Rest in a quiet sort of captivity. Snow draped over rooftops like folded linen, muffling sound, muting the world. Only the faint rhythm of breath and boots could be heard near the precinct. Officer Silas Dune's boots. And beside them, the low, measured exhale of his canine partner. Ashen. The dog's fur was the color of storm clouds. His eyes a startling pale gold that caught whatever light winter offered. Silas had always found comfort in silence. But this winter's quiet was different. It carried memory. There had been another storm once, another mission gone wrong. He had lost a man then, and since that night, the sound of chains had replaced laughter in his mind. Ashen was his only constant now, the one creature who met his gaze without expectation or pity. Most mornings began the same. Silas stood on the porch of the station, coffee cooling in his hand, watching the woman with the baby pass by. Mara Wynne. She walked with a shawl drawn close, her child bundled against her chest, her footsteps leaving neat, deliberate prints. She never looked up, though she must have known he watched. The town whispered about her, how her husband had drowned in the spring thaw, how she refused company or kindness. They called her strange, proud, broken. Silas thought she simply endured. Ashen would whine softly each time she passed. Once, Silas loosened his glove and rubbed the dog's ear. "She's not ours to comfort," he murmured. But he left a stack of firewood near her porch that evening anyway. And the next morning, a bowl of milk appeared beside the fence where Ashen slept. Neither spoke of it. The days passed that way, unspoken gestures bridging the distance between three lonely souls. The snow deepened, turning the streets to narrow white corridors. Children stopped playing outside. The air tasted of iron and pine, and the sky remained a bruise-colored gray. Silas carried the weight of routine like a cross, feeding Ashen, walking patrol, exchanging nods with townsfolk who no longer met his eyes. Etta Crow, the old midwife, said once that Willow's Rest had a way of chewing up its wounded. "We don't bury sorrow here," she told him, her voice soft as dust. "We just let it freeze." It was a Tuesday morning when the freezing point broke. Silas had tied Ashen behind the station, as always, before stepping inside to sign the duty log. The wind that day came sharp from the north, whistling through the slats of the stable. He was halfway through pouring another cup of coffee when he heard it. A metallic snap, then the thunder of paws against snow. When he rushed outside, the chain lay broken, curling like a dead serpent on the ground. Ashen was gone. Panic surged cold through Silas's veins. He shouted for the deputies scanning the whitened street. A boy pointed toward the square, his mittened hand trembling. "He ran that way, toward the post office." Mara Wynne was there, crossing the square with Ivy swaddled in blue. Her shawl whipped in the wind. The baby's small hand peeked from the blanket, reaching for flakes of falling snow. She didn't see the dog yet, only the commotion, the shouts of, "The canine's loose. The beast's gone mad." Ashen came bounding through the drift, fur bristled, eyes fixed on something unseen. The crowd scattered. Someone screamed. Mara turned just as he lunged. She clutched Ivy tight, falling backward into the snow. Time fractured. Silas ran, boots sliding, heart hammering. The world shrank to the space between his breath and the echo of hers. He saw Ashen's muzzle red with blood, heard the cries of bystanders. "He's attacking her!" And for a heartbeat, even he believed it. He drew his sidearm. Then he saw what no one else had. A glint of scaled motion near Mara's feet. The body of a snake, coiled and twitching, its fangs sunk into the air where her leg had been. The winter chill had driven it from its burrow, desperate, deadly. Ashen had crushed it with his teeth. The dog stepped back, panting, blood dripping from his jaws. The snake's body twitched once, then stilled. Mara stared in stunned silence, holding Ivy close, tears freezing on her lashes. By the time Silas reached them, the damage was done, not to flesh, but to faith. The sheriff and half the town had gathered, shouting over one another. Someone seized Ashen's collar. Others called for the gun. "He's dangerous. Put him down before he kills someone for real." Silas tried to speak, but his voice splintered against the noise. He looked at Mara, hoping she'd say something, anything, but she only rocked her baby, her lips parted in shock. Her silence was mistaken for fear. The sheriff's verdict came fast, cold, unyielding. "Confine the animal. We'll sort it after sundown." Silas didn't fight it. Maybe he should have. Instead, he led Ashen back through the snow, ignoring the whispers that followed. Even the officer can't control his own dog. Some beasts are born bad. That widow's cursed. Ashen walked beside him without resistance. The leash felt heavier than iron. They reached the holding shed at dusk. The light inside was thin and blue, spilling across wooden walls. Silas closed the door behind them and crouched before his partner. The dog's chest rose and fell in slow rhythm. His eyes searched Silas's face as though asking what crime he'd committed. Silas pressed a hand against his fur, feeling the warmth there, the steady pulse beneath. "You saved them," he whispered. The words fogged in the cold air, vanishing almost as quickly as they came. He stayed there for a long while, listening to the faint hum of the wind, the creak of the walls, the world narrowing to the sound of a heartbeat and a man's quiet regret. Outside, night fell thick and fast. The town's windows glowed like small, watchful eyes. Somewhere across the square, Mara stood by her window, the baby asleep against her shoulder. She could still see it, Ashen's sudden charge, the flash of teeth, the chaos. Yet beneath the fear, something else stirred, doubt. The way the dog had stood over her, protective, not predatory. The way his gaze, even then, had been calm. Snow drifted past the glass, catching light like falling ash. She closed her eyes and whispered to the child. "He didn't mean harm, did he?" In the holding shed, Ashen stirred, ears pricking as though hearing her voice through the dark. Silas leaned against the wall, exhaustion pressing on his shoulders, the image of the snake burning behind his eyes. He wanted to tell someone, to prove the truth, but he knew how stories worked in Willow's Rest. Truth was a fragile thing, and rumor a storm that never tired. When he finally stepped outside, the cold bit deep enough to sting. Etta Crow waited near the gate, her shawl drawn up, breath pluming like incense. "I saw it from the mill," she said softly. "Didn't look like an attack to me." Silas met her eyes. "They won't listen." "Maybe not tonight," she said. "But winter doesn't last forever." He watched her walk away, her figure fading into snowfall, her words lingering like the taste of smoke. Later, alone in his quarters, Silas removed the badge from his coat and set it on the table. The metal gleamed faintly under the lamplight. He stared at it until it blurred, until it became another shape entirely. The flash of Ashen's eyes, the trust he'd seen there. He couldn't sleep. The silence pressed too close, filled with things unsaid. When the wind rattled the window pane, he thought it whispered the dog's name. By dawn, Willow's Rest would be awake again, tongues wagging, tempers hot despite the cold. There would be talk of danger, of justice, of fear, and somewhere in a dark shed behind the precinct, a creature who had only ever protected would lie waiting, chained not by guilt but by human blindness. Silas stood at the window, watching the first faint light crawl over the snow. The world looked clean from this distance, untouched. But he knew better. He knew how easily a truth could vanish beneath white silence. He whispered into the emptiness, not sure who he was speaking to. Ashen, Mara, or himself. "I'll make it right." The words were small, nearly lost in the wind, but they carried the weight of a promise. And outside, the morning broke cold and colorless, as if the town itself was holding its breath. The storm rolled in before dawn, swallowing the town in a shroud of gray. Snow fell so thick it blurred the outlines of the world, turning Willow's Rest into a dream half-remembered. Within the holding shed, Ashen lay curled against the cold, his breath shallow, the chain tight around his neck. Each exhale rose in a faint ghost of vapor. He did not whimper. Dogs like him did not beg. They waited, trusting the bond that had once seemed unbreakable. Silas June sat alone at his desk in the precinct, a lamp flickering beside him. The papers before him were damp from his own hands, the ink running slightly at the corners. The order for euthanasia lay there, signed by Sheriff Reed, stamped with the seal of finality. His eyes traced the lines again and again until the words lost shape. He could hear Ashen's quiet panting through the thin wall, rhythmic and patient, as though the dog still believed his officer would come for him. He wanted to go. He wanted to tear up the paper and walk out into the storm. But duty had been carved into him like scripture. Follow orders, maintain control, don't let your heart make decisions your badge will have to defend. Still, the thought pressed harder. What good was duty if it demanded you kill the only creature who had ever stayed when everyone else left? Across town, Mara Wynne couldn't sleep. The wind clawed at her shutters, howling like something alive. Ivy stirred in her crib, small and fretful. The fire had gone low, casting thin orange light that flickered over the wooden floor. Mara sat by the window, her shawl drawn tight, staring into the darkness. She saw again the moment Ashen lunged, the way he'd moved between her and the unseen threat, how he'd stood over them, trembling but protective. She told herself it had been madness, that grief had blurred her memory, but the feeling lingered. The dog had saved them. The more she tried to dismiss it, the sharper it became, until she found herself rising, pulling on her boots, and lighting a lantern. She wrapped Ivy in her blanket and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I'll come back before you wake," she whispered. leaving her with Etta Crow, who slept lightly and understood without question. The storm fought her every step. Snow lashed her face, turning breath to ice. By the time she reached the oak near the frozen creek, the light from her lantern had dimmed to a trembling pulse. Something caught her eye beneath the drift, a coil of brown and gold, half buried, rigid with frost. She brushed the snow away and gasped. The snake lay there, the same pattern she remembered from that morning, its body crushed. Her hands shook as she lifted it with a stick, heart pounding with disbelief and relief and shame. The truth had been here all along, cold and waiting. She turned toward the town, her lantern swinging wildly. At the precinct, Silas still sat unmoving, the lamp guttering low. Sheriff Reed entered without knocking, his coat dusted white. "We do it tonight," he said. "Storm'll keep folks indoors. Less noise that way." His tone was final, not cruel, but worn. The voice of a man who had long stopped questioning right from necessary. Silas looked up, his jaw tightening. "He didn't attack her," Reed frowned. "You saw the blood." "I saw the snake," Silas said quietly. The sheriff's expression hardened. "You're grasping. Don't make this harder than it is. One beast for the peace of many. That's the law." When the door closed behind him, the silence that followed was unbearable. Silas rose, paced once, twice, then went to the window. Snow blurred the lamplight outside, and for a fleeting moment, he thought he saw a figure moving toward the station, a lantern bobbing through the haze. Mara burst through the door minutes later, breathless, her hair damp and tangled, her hands clutching the snake's carcass. "You have to stop this," she said, voice breaking. "He wasn't attacking me. He saved my child." The sheriff stared at her, disbelief flickering across his face. "You're sure? I saw it. The venom, the bite. He killed it before it could reach us." Her words spilled fast, urgent, burning the frost from the air. She turned to Silas. "You know it's true." Silas didn't speak, only nodded once, and that was enough. But Reed hesitated, duty warring with doubt. Even if he meant no harm, the town won't see it that way. "They're scared." Mara stepped closer, her voice trembling but fierce. "Then let them be scared of their own blindness. I won't let you kill a creature that saved my baby." The sheriff looked between them, the widow with fire in her eyes, the officer with guilt in his, and the paper on the desk. He sighed, slow and weary. "If he's still alive come morning, he's yours. But I won't stop the others if they come." When he left, the door slammed against the wind. Silas didn't wait. He grabbed his coat and the keys, motioned for Mara to follow. They crossed the yard, snow crunching beneath their boots, the cold so sharp it felt like glass. He fumbled with the lock, the metal frozen to his gloves, until the door gave way. Ashen lay in the corner, barely lifting his head. When Silas knelt, the dog's tail moved weakly, a faint thump against the floor. "Easy, boy," he murmured. "We're going home." He unlatched the chain, and Ashen rose, unsteady but obedient, pressing his muzzle against Silas's chest. Together they stepped into the storm. The snow came down in sheets, but Silas moved with purpose, Mara beside him, holding the lantern high. They were halfway to her cabin when shouts broke through the wind. Men from the saloon, torches in hand, their shapes dim through the storm. "There!" someone cried. "He's got the beast!" Silas pulled Ashen close. "Keep moving." The mob advanced, the torches flaring against the darkness. For a moment it seemed everything, the dog, the storm, the town, would collapse into violence. Then Mara stepped forward, holding the snake aloft, its frozen body dangling from her hand. "This is your monster," she shouted. "He saved my baby from it while you all stood behind your windows." The flames wavered. The men looked at one another, unsure. The sheriff arrived moments later, his face shadowed beneath his hat. He saw the snake, the widow's defiance, the dog trembling beside Silas. Something in him cracked. "Put out those torches," he ordered. "Go home." One by one the flames died. The mob retreated into the storm, their voices fading. Silence fell again. But it was a different kind now. Heavier, reverent, as if the world itself had exhaled. Mara turned to Silas, her eyes glistening. "He can't stay here. They'll never forget." Silas nodded. "Then we'll go." By dawn the storm had softened. The snow lay smooth and unbroken, reflecting the pale light of morning. Ashen trotted ahead, his prints the first marks in the untouched white. Mara followed beside Silas, ivy nestled against her chest. None of them spoke. Words would have spoiled the quiet grace of it, the understanding that needed no sound. They walked until the town was no longer visible, until the air tasted of pine instead of smoke. They reached a small cabin by the edge of the woods, where the river still ran beneath thin ice. Silas opened the door, dust rising from long unused corners. It would do. Days passed, and the world thawed slowly. Ashen regained his strength, bounding through drifts with new energy. Mara found laughter again in Ivy's small noises. Silas, for the first time in years, began to speak of things beyond duty. His old dreams, the sound of his mother's singing, the way he used to carve wooden figures when he couldn't sleep. He carved one for Ivy, a little wolf with folded ears. When he handed it to her, Mara smiled, the expression fragile but real. "You're not the man they say you are," she said quietly. He looked at her, the firelight catching in his eyes. "Neither are you." Outside, the snow melted into rivulets that traced paths toward the river. The world smelled of wet earth and cedar. Ashen lay by the hearth, content, the scars on his muzzle faint reminders of a night that could have ended in tragedy, but hadn't. Etta Crow visited once, carrying bread and gossip. "Town's turned itself inside out," she said with a grin. "Some call him the guardian of Willow's Rest now." "Strange how quick truth can thaw when it suits comfort," Silas chuckled softly. "Let them have their stories." Mara poured tea, steam curling between them like the ghost of what might yet come. When night fell, they stood at the door, watching the moon rise over the woods. The air was still, the kind of silence that healed instead of hurt. Silas looked down at Ashen, whose eyes glowed amber in the dark. "You found your peace, didn't you?" he murmured. The dog wagged his tail once, slow and sure. Mara's voice was soft beside him. "Maybe we all did." And for the first time in years, Silas believed it. The world no longer felt frozen. Somewhere deep in the forest, water moved freely again, carrying the sound of renewal. Later, when the story was told around hearths and whispered through the town, people said the officer and the widow lived quietly by the river with their loyal dog. Some called it redemption, others rumor. But Etta, when asked, would only smile and say, "Sometimes, the gentlest hearts make the loudest miracles." And if you listen closely on a winter's night, when the wind stills and the snow glows blue beneath the moon, you might hear the faint echo of a dog's bark and a child's laughter carried together on the cold air, a reminder that even in the harshest season, grace finds a way. If you believe in quiet miracles, in loyalty that outlives fear, subscribe to hear more whispered tales like this one.